You're about to discover the 9 weirdest, rudest, and strangest cruises that you can go on. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my tips for travelers. In this video, I'm going to talk about 9 really unusual, wacky, and sometimes rather rude cruises. The first cruise is a nudist cruise. These are surprisingly popular. So whilst some cruise lines, more German cruise lines like AIDA and Hapag-Lloyd, do have nude bathing areas or topless bathing areas, these are totally nude cruises. There are a number of specialist companies that focus on nudist holidays, and they charter whole ships, and the whole ship is a nudist cruise. Now, I have known people that have been in various ports that have pulled up alongside ships that have been chartered by a nudist cruise, had a look across and been quite surprised at the amount of bits and pieces flopping about on deck and around and about. So nudist cruise is definitely something to consider. If that appeals to you, there's a couple of sites you can look at. So for example, there's Bliss Travel, which focus on nudist travel and cruises. And also there's a site called cruisebear.com, which is organized by Bare Necessities, where they have a lot of nudist cruises. If cruising nude is actually just a little bit too tame for you and you want something even more erotic, what about a swingers cruise? Now, I first discovered swingers cruises when I noticed on one of my videos I was getting a lot of extra views all of a sudden, and I realized it's because a swinger cruise site was chartering that particular ship and it was driving traffic to watch the video. If you're looking for a swingers cruise, if that does appeal to you, again, the ships are entirely chartered, so everyone on there is a swinger. There are specific companies and groups that charter whole ships and organize swingers cruises with all the things that go along with that. And very simple, there's a site that's called theswingerscruise.com if that's something that piques your interest. Swingers cruises are generally couples only and normally are for heterosexual couples only. The LGBT community is not ignored at all when it comes to cruising. You'll find that cruising is particularly popular amongst the gay community. So a lot of ships you go on, you'll find gay couples and gay groups. And there's many organizations and groups that organize and charter parts or all of ships. One of the most renowned of all, though, is Atlantis. Atlantis charter big mega ships and hold massive big parties. These parties are absolutely renowned. They are themed parties every night. It's really full on, and people who've been on them do report all sorts of goings on and certainly very liberal attitudes. So if you're looking for a LGBT cruise and you want a little bit on the wild side, take a look at something like Atlantis. There's also lots of lesbian cruises like Olivia, for example, and then there's the more sedate kind of LGBT cruising, and you can take a look at sites like meetmeonboard.com, which cater a little bit more for the tamer side of LGBT cruising. But certainly if you want to go on a focused LGBT cruise, there are lots of options all around the world. The fourth unusual cruise to go on is something that's probably grown in popularity because of shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. And there are drag cruises at sea, and I think they can get more and more popular. At the moment, they tend to charter parts of ships and hold events on part of ships, but I'm pretty sure if you take a look, you'll find increasingly whole cruise ships are being dedicated to drag at sea. Even river cruising companies are getting in on the act, and so You by Uniworld had a drag cruise down the rivers of Europe. If you're interested in finding more about drag queens at sea, take a look at sites like queensoverboard.com. My fifth set of unusual cruises are for people who love music, no matter what type of music you like. Increasingly, more and more bands have realized that cruising is a great way to diversify. So you'll find everything from New Kids on the Block, Kiss, John Bon Jovi. They're all starting to run very specific dedicated cruises to target their fans. So if you're a big lover of music, you're likely to find a cruise for you. You'll find all sorts of band-specific cruises, but also you'll find themed cruises like Monsters of Rock, Soul Train, country music. So pop and music style cruises are growing and growing. So if you are a big fan of a particular artist, keep an eye, and it's highly likely, particularly if they are bands from the 80s, 90s, or even the 2000s, it's highly likely they're going to pop up on a cruise quite soon. Linked to that is another really popular and fast-growing cruise are cruises that take you back in time, particularly the 80s and the 90s. These are cruises normally organized by a cruise company, although there are actual organizations that are set up and are now running these, where they'll run 80s themed cruises, 90s themed cruises, and they're proving really, really popular, particularly as more and more people from the 80s and the 90s generation are starting to go cruising. For example, a recent 80s cruise has had bands like the B-52s, Berlin, Patti Smith, Tony Hadley, Dire Straits, Midnight Star, the Jets. And in the 90s, there'll be really popular boy and girl bands from the 90s. So certainly, if you want to step back in time and relive your teenage or 20s, cruises themed around the 80s and 90s, really popular and growing enormously. One of the first areas that really tapped into the whole cruising world and themed cruises were the whole area of TV shows, particularly cult-type TV shows. You'll find increasingly whole ships are being chartered by fan clubs or groups. Star Trek was one of the first one, but you'll find Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, Golden Girls, and so huge amounts of big popular TV shows are increasingly running themed cruises. The cruise lines are really keen to embrace and support these because often it brings a lot of people new to cruise on board for the first time. So if you're a big fan of a TV show, particularly cult TV shows, you'll find if you go and search online for the name of your TV show with the word cruise added, it's highly likely you're going to find a themed cruise. The great thing about those is they will normally bring on board many of the big actors, actresses, or people involved in that whole show, and there'll be lots of insights, inside information, and behind the scenes stuff. So a bit like attending a kind of a Comic-Con event on land, but it happens at sea. So it's a really popular and growing type of cruise. One of the things that I find really interesting, and I think is going to grow more and more, is if you have a particular hobby, no matter how unusual it is, you're also likely to find there's a cruise themed around it. Now, while these currently don't necessarily overtake the whole ship, you'll find if you have a particular interest. So even if you're into knitting or quilting, there are many, many cruises which charter parts of a ship and focus on that. You'll find there are ones around motorcycling, Zumba, martial arts, pretty much any hobby you think of, there's likely to be part of a cruise or a whole cruise dedicated to that. So again, if you have a particular interest or hobby, it's a really good idea to search that plus the word cruise and find out if there's one. If not, very easy to organize one. And increasingly, I'm coming across people that have groups, interest groups, that are starting to form their own groups on board. Bear in mind, many cruise lines will give you free cabins. Often, if you can sell 8 twin occupancy cabins, the cruise line will give you a free cabin. So even if everyone ends up spending what they would normally spend, but if you put it all together and do it as through one agent or through the cruise line, you can very easily organize a group around your particular hobby. The next, and also an incredibly interesting, unusual cruise, is a cruise where you have no idea where you're going. Whilst these cruises are not that big, there are a couple of cruise lines like Fred Olsen, for example, that sails out of the UK, that every year they sell a mystery cruise where the captain decides the itinerary. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure the itinerary is decided beforehand because they have to have booked berths and excursions and all that kind of stuff. But when you book the cruise, you have no idea where you're going. Sometimes on the cruise, they will give you a little option where you can vote between 2 possible destinations. So if you love cruising and you want to be a little bit adventurous, mystery cruises are also a great idea. Cruising doesn't have to be ordinary, it doesn't have to be all the same. You can still go to great destinations and live out your dreams and fantasies, whether it's nudism, swinging, love of the Golden Girls, or knitting. There are lots of unusual, wacky, and as we've discovered, some rude cruises that you could go on. I have lots of other tips about cruising and cruises. Why don't you watch another one of those videos right now?